Chapter 8. When George regained some measure of his presence of mind, Miss Lucy Morgan's cheek, snowy and cold, was pressing his nose slightly to one side. His right arm was firmly about her neck, and a monstrous amount of her fur boa seemed to mingle with an equally unplausible quantity of snow in his mouth. He was confused, but conscious of no objection to any of these juxtapositions. She was apparently uninjured, for she sat up, hatless, her hair down, and said mildly, "Good heavens!" Though her father had been under his machine when they passed, he was the first to reach them. He threw himself on his knees beside his daughter, but found her already laughing and was reassured. "They're all right," he called to Isabel, who was running towards them, ahead of her brother and Fanny Minifer. "This snowbank's a feather bed. Nothing the matter with them at all. Don't look so pale." "Georgie!" she gasped. "Georgie!" Georgie was on his feet, snow all over him. "Don't make a fuss, Mother. Nothing's the matter. That darned silly horse—" Sudden tears stood in Isabel's eyes. "To see you down underneath, dragging, oh—" Then, with shaking hands, she began to brush the snow from him. "Let me alone," he protested. "You'll ruin your gloves. You're getting snow all over you, and—" "No, no," she cried. "You'll catch cold. You mustn't catch cold." And she continued to brush him. Amberson had brought Lucy's hat. Miss Fanny acted as lady's maid, and both victims of the accident were presently restored to about their usual appearance and condition of apparel. In fact, encouraged by the two older gentlemen, the entire party, with one exception, decided that the episode was, after all, a merry one, and began to laugh about it. But George was glummer than the December twilight now swiftly closing in. "That darned horse," he said. "I wouldn't bother about Pendennis, Georgie," said his uncle. "You can send a man out for what's left of the cutter tomorrow, and Pendennis will gallop straight home to his stable. He'll be there a long while before we will, because all we've got to depend on to get us home is Jean Morgan's broken-down chafing dish yonder." They were approaching the machine as he spoke, and his friend, again underneath it, heard him. He emerged, smiling. "She'll go," he said. "What? All aboard!" He offered his hand to Isabel. She was smiling, but still pale, and her eyes, in spite of the smile, kept upon George in a shocked anxiety. Miss Fanny had already mounted to the rear seat, and George, after helping Lucy Morgan to climb up beside his aunt, was following. Isabel saw that his shoes were light things of patent leather and that snow was clinging to them. She made a little rush toward him, and, as one of his feet rested on the iron step of the machine, in mounting, she began to clean the snow from his shoe with her almost aerial lace handkerchief. "You mustn't catch cold," she cried. "Stop that!" George shouted, and furiously withdrew his foot. "Then stamp the snow off," she begged. "You mustn't ride with wet feet." "They're not!" George roared, thoroughly outraged. "For heaven's sake, get in! You're standing in the snow yourself. Get in!" Isabel consented, turning to Morgan, whose habitual expression of apprehensiveness was somewhat accentuated. He climbed up after her, George Amberson having gone to the other side. "You're the same Isabel I used to know," he said in a low voice. "You're a divinely ridiculous woman." "Am I, Eugene?" she said, not displeased. "Divinely and ridiculous just counterbalance each other, don't they? Plus, 1 and -1 equal nothing. So you mean I'm nothing in particular?" "No," he answered, tugging at a lever. "That doesn't seem to be precisely what I meant. There!" This exclamation referred to the subterranean machinery, for dismaying sounds came from beneath the floor, and the vehicle plunged, then rolled noisily forward. "Behold!" George Amberson exclaimed. "She does move! It must be another accident." "Accident?" Morgan shouted over the din. "No! She breathes, she stirs, she seems to feel a thrill of life along her keel," and he began to sing the Star-Spangled Banner. Amberson joined him lustily, and sang on when Morgan stopped. The twilight sky cleared, discovering a round moon already risen, and the musical congressman hailed this bright presence with the complete text and melody of the blue Danube River. His nephew, behind, was gloomy. He had overheard his mother's conversation with the inventor. It seemed curious to him that this Morgan, of whom he had never heard until last night, should be using the name Isabel so easily, and George felt that it was not just the thing for his mother to call Morgan Eugene. The resentment of the previous night came upon George again. Meanwhile, his mother and Morgan continued their talk, but he could no longer hear what they said. The noise of the car and his uncle's songful mood prevented. He marked how animated Isabel seemed. It was not strange to see his mother so gay, but it was strange that a man not of the family should be the cause of her gaiety, and George sat frowning. Fanny Minifer had begun to talk to Lucy. Your father wanted to prove that his horseless carriage would run, even in the snow, she said. It really does, too. Of course. It's so interesting. He's been telling us how he's going to change it. He says he's going to have wheels all made of rubber and blown up with air. I don't understand what he means at all. I should think they'd explode. But Eugene seems to be very confident. He always was confident, though. It seems so like old times to hear him talk. She became thoughtful, and Lucy turned to George. You tried to swing underneath me and break the fall for me when we went over, she said. I knew you were doing that, and it was nice of you. Wasn't any fall to speak of, he returned brusquely. Couldn't have hurt either of us. Still, it was friendly of you, and awfully quick, too. I'll not forget it. Her voice had a sound of genuineness, very pleasant, and George began to forget his annoyance with her father. This annoyance of his had not been alleviated by the circumstance that neither of the seats of the old sewing machine was designed for 3 people. But when his neighbor spoke thus gratefully, he no longer minded the crowding. In fact, it pleased him so much that he began to wish the old sewing machine would go even slower. And she had spoken no word of blame for his letting that darned horse get the cutter into the ditch. George presently addressed her hurriedly, almost tremulously, speaking close to her ear. I forgot to tell you something. You're pretty nice. I thought so the first second I saw you last night. I'll come for you tonight and take you to the assembly at the Amberson Hotel. You're going, aren't you? Yes, but I'm going with Papa and the Sharons. I'll see you there. Looks to me as if you were awfully conventional, George grumbled, and his disappointment was deeper than he was willing to let her see, though she probably did see. Well, we'll dance the cotillion together anyhow. I'm afraid not. I promised Mr. Kinney. What? George's tone was shocked, as at incredible news. Well, you could break that engagement, I guess, if you wanted to. Girls always can get out of things when they want to. Won't you? I don't think so. Why not? Because I promised him several days ago. George gulped and lowered his pride. I don't... Oh, look here. I only want to go to that thing tonight to get to see something of you, and if you don't dance the cotillion with me, how can I? I'll only be here 2 weeks, and the others have got all the rest of your visit to see you. Won't you do it, please? I couldn't. See here, said the stricken George. If you're going to decline to dance that cotillion with me simply because you promised a miserable red-headed outsider like Fred Kinney, why, we might as well quit. Quit what? You know perfectly well what I mean, he said huskily. I don't. Well, you ought to. But I don't at all. George, thoroughly hurt and not a little embittered, expressed himself in a short outburst of laughter. Well, I ought to have seen it. Seen what? That you might turn out to be a girl who'd like a fellow of the red-headed Kinney sort. I ought to have seen it from the first. Lucy bore her disgrace lightly. Oh, dancing a cotillion with a person doesn't mean that you like him, but I don't see anything in particular the matter with Mr. Kinney. What is? If you don't see anything the matter with him for yourself, George responded icily, I don't think pointing it out would help you. You probably wouldn't understand. You might try, she suggested. Of course, I'm a stranger here, and if people have done anything wrong or have something unpleasant about them, I wouldn't have any way of knowing it just at first. If poor Mr. Kinney, I'd prefer not to discuss it, said George curtly. He's an enemy of mine. Why? I prefer not to discuss it. Well, but I prefer not to discuss it. Very well. She began to hum the air of the song which Mr. George Amberson was now discoursing. O moon of my delight that knows no wane. And there was no further conversation on the back seat. They had entered Amberson Addition, and the moon of Mr. Amberson's delight was overlaid by a slender Gothic filigree, the branches that sprang from the shade trees lining the street. Through the windows of many of the houses rosy lights were flickering, and silver tinsel and evergreen wreaths and brilliant little glass globes of silver and wine color could be seen, and glimpses were caught of Christmas trees, with people decking them by firelight, reminders that this was Christmas Eve. The ride-stealers had disappeared from the highway, though now and then, over the gasping and howling of the horseless carriage, there came a shrill jeer from some young passer-by upon the sidewalk. "Mister, for heaven's sake, go and get a hoss! Get a hoss! Get a hoss!" The contrivance stopped with a heart-shaking jerk before Isabel's house. The gentleman jumped down, helping Isabel and Fanny to descend. There were friendly leave-takings, and one that was not precisely friendly. "It's au revoir till tonight, isn't it?" Lucy asked, laughing. "Good afternoon," said George, and he did not wait, as his relatives did, to see the old sewing machine start briskly down the street toward the Sharons, its lighter load consisting now of only Mr. Morgan and his daughter. George went into the house at once. He found his father reading the evening paper in the library. "Where are your mother and your Aunt Fanny?" Mr. Minifer inquired, not looking up. "They're coming," said his son, and casting himself heavily into a chair, stared at the fire. His prediction was verified a few moments later. The two ladies came in cheerfully, unfastening their fur cloaks. "It's all right, Georgie," said Isabel. "Your Uncle George called to us that Pendennis got home safely. Put your shoes close to the fire, dear, or else go and change them." She went to her husband and patted him lightly on the shoulder, an action which George watched with somber moodiness. "You might dress before long," she suggested. "We're all going to the assembly after dinner, aren't we? Brother George said he'd go with us." "Look here," said George abruptly. "How about this man Morgan and his old sewing machine? Doesn't he want to get grandfather to put money into it? Isn't he trying to work Uncle George for that? Isn't that what he's up to?" It was Miss Fanny who responded. "You little silly," she cried with surprising sharpness. "What on earth are you talking about? Eugene Morgan's perfectly able to finance his own inventions these days." "I'll bet he borrows money off Uncle George," the nephew insisted. Isabel looked at him in grave perplexity. "Why do you say such a thing, George?" she asked. "He strikes me as that sort of man," he answered doggedly. "Isn't he, father?" Minifer set down his paper for the moment. "He was a fairly wild young fellow 20 years ago," he said, glancing at his wife absently. "He was like you in one thing, Georgie. He spent too much money, only he didn't have any mother to get money out of a grandfather for him, so he was usually in debt. But I believe I've heard he's done fairly well of late years. No, I can't say I think he's a swindler, and I doubt if he needs anybody else's money to back his horseless carriage." "Well, what's he brought the old thing here for, then? People that own elephants don't take them elephants around with them when they go visiting. What's he got it here for?" "I'm sure I don't know," said Mr. Minifer, resuming his paper. "You might ask him." Isabel laughed and patted her husband's shoulder again. "Aren't you going to dress? Aren't we all going to the dance?" He groaned faintly. "Aren't your brother and Georgie escorts enough for you and Fanny? Wouldn't you enjoy it at all? You know I don't." Isabel let her hand remain upon his shoulder a moment longer. She stood behind him, looking into the fire, and George, watching her broodingly, thought there was more color in her face than the reflection of the flames accounted for. "Well, then," she said indulgently, "stay at home and be happy. We won't urge you if you'd really rather not." "I really wouldn't," he said contentedly. Half an hour later, George was passing through the upper hall in a bathrobe stage of preparation for the evening's gaieties when he encountered his Aunt Fanny. He stopped her. "Look here," he said. "What in the world is the matter with you?" she demanded, regarding him with little amiability. "You look as if you were rehearsing for a villain in a play. Do change your expression." His expression gave no sign of yielding to the request. On the contrary, its somberness deepened. "I suppose you don't know why Father doesn't want to go tonight," he said solemnly. "You're his only sister, and yet you don't know." "He never wants to go anywhere that I ever heard of," said Fanny. "What is the matter with you?" "He doesn't want to go because he doesn't like this man Morgan." "Good gracious!" Fanny cried impatiently. "Eugene Morgan isn't in your father's thoughts at all, one way or the other. Why should he be?" George hesitated. "Well, it strikes me. Look here, what makes you and everybody so excited over him?" "Excited?" she jeered. "Can't people be glad to see an old friend without silly children like you having to make a to-do about it? I've just been in your mother's room suggesting that she might give a little dinner for them." "For who?" "For whom, Georgie? For Mr. Morgan and his daughter." "Look here," George said quickly, "don't do that. Mother mustn't do that. It wouldn't look well." "Wouldn't look well?" Fanny mocked him, and her suppressed vehemence betrayed a surprising acerbity. "See here, Georgie Minifer, I suggest that you just march straight on into your room and finish your dressing. Sometimes you say things that show you have a pretty mean little mind." George was so astounded by this outburst that his indignation was delayed by his curiosity. "Why, what upsets you this way?" he inquired. "I know what you mean," she said, her voice still lowered, but not decreasing in sharpness. "You're trying to insinuate that I'd get your mother to invite Eugene Morgan here on my account because he's a widower." "I am?" George gasped, nonplussed. "I'm trying to insinuate that you're setting your cap at him and getting Mother to help you? Is that what you mean?" Beyond a doubt, that was what Miss Fanny meant. She gave him a white-hot look. "You attend to your own affairs," she whispered fiercely and swept away. George, dumbfounded, returned to his room for meditation. He had lived for years in the same house with his Aunt Fanny, and it now appeared that during all those years he had been thus intimately associating with a total stranger. Never before had he met the passionate lady with whom he had just held a conversation in the hall. So she wanted to get married, and wanted George's mother to help her with this horseless carriage widower. "Well, I will be shot," he muttered aloud. I certainly will be shot," and he began to laugh. "Lord Almighty!" But presently, at the thought of the horseless carriage widower's daughter, his grimness returned, and he resolved upon a line of conduct for the evening. He would nod to her carefully when he first saw her, and after that he would notice her no more. He would not dance with her. He would not favor her in the cotillion. He would not go near her. He descended to dinner upon the third urgent summons of a colored butler, having spent 2 hours dressing and rehearsing. Chapter 9. The Honorable George Amberson was a congressman who led cotillions, the sort of congressman an Amberson would be. He did it negligently tonight, yet with infallible dexterity, now and then glancing humorously at the spectators, people of his own age. They were seated in a tropical grove at one end of the room whither they had retired at the beginning of the cotillion, which they surrendered entirely to the 20s and the late teens. And here, grouped with that stately pair, Sidney and Amelia Amberson, sat Isabel with Fanny, while Eugene Morgan appeared to bestow an amiable devotion impartially upon the three sisters-in-law. Fanny watched his face eagerly, laughing at everything he said. Amelia smiled blandly, but rather because of graciousness than because of interest, while Isabel, looking out at the dancers, rhythmically moved a great fan of blue ostrich feathers, listened to Eugene thoughtfully, yet all the while kept her shining eyes on Georgie. Georgie had carried out his rehearsed projects with precision. He had given Miss Morgan a nod studied into perfection during his lengthy toilette before dinner. "Oh, yes, I do seem to remember that curious little outsider," this nod seemed to say. Thereafter, all cognizance of her evaporated. The curious little outsider was permitted no further existence worth the struggle. Nevertheless, she flashed in the corner of his eye too often. He was aware of her dancing demurely, and of her viciously flirtatious habit of never looking up at her partner, but keeping her eyes concealed beneath downcast lashes. And he had over-sufficient consciousness of her between the dances, though it was not possible to see her at these times, even if he had cared to look frankly in her direction. She was invisible in a thicket of young dress coats. The black thicket moved as she moved, and her location was hatefully apparent, even if he had not heard her voice laughing from the thicket. It was annoying how her voice, though never loud, pursued him. No matter how vociferous were other voices all about, he seemed unable to prevent himself from constantly recognizing hers. It had a quaver in it, not pathetic, rather humorous than pathetic, a quality which annoyed him to the point of rage, because it was so difficult to get away from. She seemed to be having a wonderful time. An unbearable soreness accumulated in his chest. His dislike of the girl and her conduct increased until he thought of leaving this sickening assembly and going home to bed. That would show her. But just then he heard her laughing and decided that it wouldn't show her, so he remained. When the young couple seated themselves in chairs against the walls round three sides of the room for the cotillion, George joined a brazen-faced group clustering about the doorway, youths with no partners, yet eligible to be called out and favored. He marked that his uncle placed the infernal Kinney and Miss Morgan as the leading couple in the first chairs at the head of the line upon the leader's right, and this disloyalty on the part of Uncle George was inexcusable, for in the family circle the nephew had often expressed his opinion of Fred Kinney. In his bitterness, George uttered a significant monosyllable. The music flourished, whereupon Mr. Kinney, Miss Morgan, and 6 of their neighbors rose and waltzed knowingly. Mr. Amberson's whistle blew. Then the 8 young people went to the favor table, and were given toys and trinkets wherewith to delight the new partners it was now their privilege to select. Around the walls, the seated non-participants in this ceremony looked rather conscious. Some chattered, endeavoring not to appear expectant. Some tried not to look wistful, and others were frankly solemn. It was a trying moment, and whoever secured a favor, this very first shot, might consider the portents happy for a successful evening. Holding their twinkling gewgaws in their hands, those about to bestow honor came toward the seated lines, where expressions became feverish. 2 of the approaching girls seemed to wander, not finding a predetermined object in sight, and these 2 were Janie Sharon and her cousin Lucy. At this, George Amberson Minifer, conceiving that he had little to anticipate from either, turned a proud back upon the room and affected to converse with his friend, Mr. Charlie Johnson. The next moment a quick little figure intervened between the 2. It was Lucy, gaily offering a silver sleigh bell decked with white ribbon. "I almost couldn't find you," she cried. George stared, took her hand, led her forth in silence, danced with her. She seemed content not to talk, but as the whistle blew, signaling that this episode was concluded, and he conducted her to her seat, she lifted the little bell toward him. "You haven't taken your favor. You're supposed to pin it on your coat," she said. "Don't you want it?" "If you insist," said George stiffly, and he bowed her into her chair, then turned and walked away, dropping the sleigh bell haughtily into his trousers pocket. The figure proceeded to its conclusion, and George was given other sleigh bells, which he easily consented to wear upon his lapel. But as the next figure began, he strolled with a bored air to the tropical grove, where sat his elders, and seated himself beside his Uncle Sidney. His mother leaned across Miss Fanny, raising her voice over the music to speak to him. "Georgie, nobody will be able to see you here. You'll not be favored. You ought to be where you can dance." "Don't care to," he returned. "Bore." "But you ought—" She stopped and laughed, waving her fan to direct his attention behind him. "Look, over your shoulder." He turned and discovered Miss Lucy Morgan in the act of offering him a purple toy balloon. "I found you," she laughed. George was startled. "Well," he said. Would you rather sit it out? Lucy asked quickly as he did not move. I don't care to dance if you... No, he said, rising. It would be better to dance. His tone was solemn, and solemnly he departed with her from the grove. Solemnly he danced with her. 4 times, with not the slightest encouragement, she brought him a favor, 4 times in succession. When the 4th came, "Look here," said George huskily, "you're going to keep this up all night? What do you mean by it?" For an instant she seemed confused. "That's what cotillions are for, aren't they?" she murmured. "What do you mean, what they're for?" "So that a girl can dance with a person she wants to." George's huskiness increased. "Well, do you mean you want to dance with me all the time, all evening?" "Well, this much of it, evidently," she laughed. "Is it because you thought I tried to keep you from getting hurt this afternoon when we upset?" She shook her head. "Was it because you want to even things up for making me angry? I mean, for hurting my feelings on the way home?" With her eyes averted, for girls of 19 can be as shy as boys sometimes, she said, "Well, you only got angry because I couldn't dance the cotillion with you. I didn't feel terribly hurt with you for getting angry about that. Was there any other reason? Did my telling you I liked you have anything to do with it?" She looked up gently, and as George met her eyes, something exquisitely touching, yet queerly delightful, gave him a catch in the throat. She looked instantly away, and, turning, ran out from the palm grove where they stood to the dancing floor. "Come on," she cried, "let's dance." He followed her. "See here, he stammered. "You mean, do you—" No, she laughed. "Let's dance." He put his arm about her almost tremulously, and they began to waltz. It was a happy dance for both of them. Christmas Day is the children's, but the holidays are youth's dancing time. The holidays belong to the early 20s and the teens, home from school and college. These years possess the holidays for a little while, then possess them only in smiling, wistful memories of holly and twinkling lights and dance music and charming faces all aglow. It is the liveliest time in life, the happiest of the irresponsible times in life. Mothers echo its happiness. Nothing is like a mother who has a son home from college, except another mother with a son home from college. Bloom does actually come upon these mothers. It is a visible thing, and they run like girls, walk like athletes, laugh like sycophants. Yet they give up their sons to the daughters of other mothers, and find it proud rapture enough to be allowed to sit and watch. Thus Isabel watched George and Lucy dancing, as together they danced away the holidays of that year into the past. "They seem to get along better than they did at first, those 2 children," Fanny Minifer said, sitting beside her at the Sharons' dance, a week after the assembly. "They seemed to be always having little quarrels of some sort at first. At least George did. He seemed to be continually pecking at that lovely, dainty little Lucy, and being cross with her over nothing." "Pecking?" Isabel laughed. "What a word to use about Georgie! I think I never knew a more angelically amiable disposition in my life." Miss Fanny echoed her sister-in-law's laugh, but it was a rueful echo, and not sweet. "He's amiable to you," she said. "That's all the sight of him you ever happened to see. And why wouldn't he be amiable to anybody that simply fell down and worshipped him every minute of her life? Most of us would. Isn't he worth worshipping? Just look at him. Isn't he charming with Lucy? See how hard he ran to get it when she dropped her handkerchief back there." "Oh, I'm not going to argue with you about George," said Miss Fanny. "I'm fond enough of him, for that matter. He can be charming, and he's certainly stunning looking. If only—" "Let the if only go, dear," Isabel suggested good-naturedly. "Let's talk about that dinner you thought I should—" "I?" Miss Fanny interrupted quickly. "Didn't you want to give it yourself?" "Indeed I did, my dear," said Isabel heartily. "I only meant that unless you had proposed it, perhaps I wouldn't—" But here Eugene came for her to dance, and she left the sentence uncompleted. Holiday dances can be happy for youth renewed as well as for youth in bud, and yet it was not with the air of a rival that Miss Fanny watched her brother's wife dancing with the widower. Miss Fanny's eyes narrowed a little, but only as if her mind engaged in a hopeful calculation. She looked pleased.